Have some fun. I need $100 bill. Yeah, get it out of my wallet. No, I need one of your $100 bills. So if you have a $100 bill, come on up here. Your money's safe. I'm not going to take your money. Anyone? Any takers? Oh, Randy was right behind you. Randy, come on up here, buddy. I'll take your $100 bill. I'll take Mike's all day. I know where you both live, I guess, but I think I have a better shot at wrestling Mike because he's lost so much weight. So you come on up here. Everybody give Randy an applause. I appreciate this. Thanks for trusting me today. That's even one of those brand new ones.
You got a release that I can sign?
Yeah. If you want to sign right here. No, that's fine. All right, so this is one of those brand new, crispy $100 bills. What I'd like you to do, as I'm talking through my intro, I would like you to try to put this mug on top of these two mugs using that $100 bill.
Oh, easy.
All right, easy, he says. All right, so last week what we learned is that Jesus is the exact change that we all... No. You cannot move these... No, you cannot move those. You're a wise old crotchety guy. I love it. Hey, well done, but no, try it again. All right. So Jesus is the exact change that we are all looking for, right? And if he is the exact change that we're all looking for, one of the things that we learned last week is that there was an individual that Jesus had an encounter with, and his name was Levi or Matthew. And Levi, nope, is still touching the glass. Those are china. You got to be careful.
Really?
I don't know. They're my wife's. I'll probably die if you break one. So please don't break one. Right? Why is it that we can trust Jesus with our future, but we have a really hard time trusting him with our finances? No, Randy, you're not understanding. You can't. This cannot touch those pieces of glass.
I know, but the paper was between us.
No. It doesn't work that way, buddy. Try it again. You're close. I like it. How is it that we could trust Jesus with our future, but we have a hard time trusting him with our finances? And what we found with Levi and Matthew is Jesus interacted with Matthew. Jesus was really kind of targeting those weaknesses and those strengths. And I think with Matthew, as he encountered Jesus, he knew that he was going to change everything about him. But no, that's wrong too. Matthew knew that Jesus was going to change everything about him, and he didn't know whether he could trust him with his past, with his disappointments, with even his future. And what we learned is that, yes, you can trust Jesus with your future as much as you can trust him with your past. And the thing that I love about Matthew's story is that Matthew's gifts, abilities, skills, and talents, all of those things that made Matthew such a great tax collector, actually would end up making him a... No. Wrong again. Here, let me put a little pressure on you. If you don't get this figured out, I am going to take that.
Oh, you got the rest?
No, I'm just kidding. You can have it. But not yet. There's a trick. Keep going. You'll figure it out. You're smart. So those skills and resources and abilities and talents that Matthew had, that he had developed with his position, with his employment, Jesus would end up using and leveraging for the kingdom's sake. Think about this. Matthew knew everybody, and he knew everything about everybody. And so, when it came down to writing who Jesus was, that he was the promised King of the Jews, what did Matthew start his gospel with? Do you remember? In Matthew chapter 1, what's in there? A big old long list of names that we don't think about, that we don't care about when we read it. We're like, yeah, let's skip chapter 1 and go right to the good stuff. But for Matthew, that's an indication that Jesus was still going to use those skills and abilities and talents that he's given us naturally, that maybe we've developed over time. He doesn't want to take your stuff. He doesn't want to take your identity. He doesn't want to take anything from you. He wants something for you. And as we talk about finance, and as we started this entire series... No, you're still on the glass. You're close. I see it was going to fall. Sorry. As we started this entire... Man, you're getting it, though. I like your creative mind. Are you paying attention to what I'm saying?
No.
That's what I thought. Yeah. I'm not sure they are either, but that's okay. That's why this is the intro. It doesn't matter, right? So as we think about, our future and our past and our finances, there's this weird kind of marriage between why can we trust him with our with our future, but not our finances. Jesus wants you to trust him with everything that you have. He doesn't want something from you. He wants something for you. The only time that we know of when Jesus actually asked for money was the time that he said, hey, can I see a coin? Kind of like what I did with Randy today. Man, this is fantastic. I love. You think you got it?
I don't know.
No? All right, you ready for the trick?
Sure.
Okay, because this $100 bill, it's really nothing special, right?
It all depends.
What's that?
It all depends where you go to take it.
I suppose. But really all it is some fancy ink on some fancy paper.
Yeah, you're right there.
Right? And what makes it worth $100?
The ink of the paper.
No.
The government behind it.
It's what the government says it's worth, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if the government says, hey, those $100 bills that we have aren't worth a $100 bill, guess what this becomes?
Well, that's true, too. But the people could say it's not worth anything either.
That's true. People could say it's not worth anything. So what's the purpose of money, right? That's kind of what the whole idea of this sermon today.
It's easier to take money than a basket full of apples or something when you're going to buy something.
Well, okay. So it's easier to take money than a basket full of apples. But see, when you use money for the purpose that it was designed to be used for, all of a sudden money has a way of adding meaning to your life. But see, money is not the meaning of our life. Money doesn't get much play at funerals, right?
It's a tool.
It's just a tool. In fact, most of the time when I've been to funerals or I've even preached funerals and we talk about money, you know what the main concept with money at funerals is? It's not how much money an individual had. It's how much they gave away.
Yeah.
So money is a much better means to an end than an end by itself. Wouldn't you agree, Randy?
Yes.
In fact, if you make money your end, there's a strong chance you might end up alone. See, using money as a means to an end is what makes
That looks a pretty good job.
money meaningful. Being meaningful is what gives something purpose. And when it's used correctly in the form that it's supposed to be used for, all of a sudden it can build some pretty amazing things in your life. Thanks, man. Appreciate that. Kind of a cool little trick, right?
That's all it is.
I don't know what you were trying to do earlier.
We add some strength to it.
Yeah, you just bring some rigidness.
Oh, it didn't work.
Here, let me do it again. Here you go, Randy. Take your $100. Hey, guys, give Randy a round of applause. That's a cool trick that you guys can use on the nephews, on the grandkids. It's kind of fun and figure it out. I'm going to try to give you a trick every week with money that's just kind of a fun interaction. But it's also to help design, to bring some application to the truth that we're trying to discover in this series called Exact Change. So using money as a means to an end rather than an end itself is what actually gives money meaning. But none of us really want money to be an ends of our life. You see, being a means to an end is what actually brings meaning to anything. And if something's not meaningful, if something has no purpose, you know what it is? It's fun, it's entertaining, but at the end of the day, it's still pointless. It's something that you'll exchange, that you'll gladly disregard. It's something that you'll get rid of pretty quickly because it has no meaning. And if your entire life is built around money as the meaning of your life, then your life actually finds no purpose. Money actually does have a purpose. It actually is meant to help accomplish an end that's bigger and broader and extends beyond ourselves. It's for us that we have to try to figure out what that meaning or purpose of money is all about. So, what's the meaning of money? What's the point of money? See, if you want your life to find meaning, if you want your life to be a means to an end rather than just to find an end without no meaning that goes beyond you, we have to discover what your life's all about. What's the purpose of your life? Your money, when you decide that your money is a means to an end, you've finally discovered what the purpose of life is all about. So I'm going to invite you to turn to Luke chapter 16, if you will, okay? Not yet, Colin. Can you go back to the title slide there, buddy? Luke chapter 16. Jesus actually tells us a little bit about what the purpose of money is all about. And it's in a parable that Luke records for us. Let me just give you a little synopsis about what we're about to read. So in Luke chapter 16, Luke was he was a doctor first and primary. But as he was a doctor, as he was a physician, as he was somebody who was designed to try to bring health and healing to people, he wanted good things for people. God would end up using Luke to tell a narrative that was kind of an investigation of the stories that he would end up hearing by kind of a close proximity to the disciples. And so Luke records historical facts. In fact, at the beginning of Luke, he writes to most excellent Theophilus, and as he's writing to this guy who has a lot of wealth and a lot of money, who he himself was very interested in all of the things about Jesus, Luke would say, I've done an investigative report. Let me tell you what my findings of this individual named Jesus is. And so he thoroughly investigated all of the different eyewitnesses and all of the different stories. He would go town to town, and he would get out his pen and his paper, and he would ask people, can you tell me the story about Jesus? Can you tell me about your interaction? And so Luke records this thorough investigation for you and for me and for future generations so that we might know this isn't some fairy tale that was made up. This is actual eyewitness accounts, and here's the investigative report on who Jesus is. And so that's the story of Luke. The interesting thing about Luke, though, is he kind of, just like the rest of the gospel authors, he is crescendoing the narrative of Jesus' timeline and ministry as it gets closer to the cross. And that's where we're at in Luke chapter 16. The message of Jesus, the message that Luke portrays about Jesus starts to crescendo. So you'll see Jesus' teachings get not louder per se, but more intense. They'll be more pointed. And Jesus talked more about money than he did almost every other subject. He talked about money more than he did heaven and hell. And so for Jesus to talk about money, it's okay for us to talk about money. Jesus, again, didn't want your money. The church doesn't need your money. We just want to teach you about money because we want your life to be full. We want your life to be vibrant. We want your life to be a blessing. We want things for your life, not from your life. Last week, I kind of shared these thoughts, and I had somebody ask me, can you just give us a real quick snapshot of where we are? Last week, I had indicated that the church was in a good financial position. But they wanted more detail, and I think that's an appropriate request. So as of June 1st, let me just kind of give you a snapshot. As of June 1st, we had received $202,000, okay? Our annual working budget that we're trying to work off of is about $580,000. So July 1st is our mid-year timeline. You guys can do your own math on that, but we're about right where we thought that we would be. Okay? One thing that we want to share with you, though, is we're just going to have some fun with this series. So at the end of this entire series, we're going to be talking about financial principles. We're going to be talking about financial tips, and you'll have all kinds of resources at your disposal. We'll have Financial Peace University classes this entire month. We have some ways for you to interact with the series through the exact change that you received in the week. If you want to drop them in the clear plastic tubes, that goes to Whitney, who is our benevolence for Holy Smoke. We have guess how many coins are in the jar. For the 3 or 4 people who are the closest to that guess, you're actually going to get a shot at the wind tunnel on the last Sunday of June. So that's going to be kind of fun. We also just have all kinds of just different things for you to interact with this series about. But the whole point of it is just so that you might have a better understanding of finance and the way finance plays in your life. At the end of the whole series in July, we're actually going to have an offering Sunday. Now, we take offerings every Sunday. But what we're going to look at is what would this church be able to do if we all gave that normal 10%? If that was our tithe, if we brought that into the storehouse, how much potential does Rising Sun actually have? So on July 1st, we're actually going to be taking an offering that represents Rising Sun's 10. That's what we're going to try to do, okay? Now, tithing is not in the New Testament, it's in the Old Testament. I get all that. But like we saw last week with the story of Matthew, Jesus isn't interested in your 10%. You know what he's interested in? He's interested in your heart. And that is what the rest of the series is going to be about. But we're in Luke chapter 16, and Luke kind of dives in, and he says, this is one of the times that Jesus talked about money. And he says in verse 1, Jesus... Now, let me pause there. This is Luke 16, verse 1. Jesus, we got to understand something about Jesus. Jesus was like a master storyteller. When he spoke, you could hear pin drops. People hung on every word that he would speak. And the reason they hung on every word is he knew just how to mix the categories enough for his audience that they really didn't know what he was about to say. And this is one of those times. Now, there's some differences in the different versions that we have. There's weaknesses in every translation. There's King James Version, New American Standard, NIV. What I'm reading out of today is the NIV version, and it actually is the only version in Luke 16 that misses one of the critical words that's next. So if you have a King James, or if you have a New American, or you have an ESV, or a New King James, your next word right after Jesus is critical. Now, here's what I want you to do. I want everybody to be reading this scripture with me. So if you don't have your phones out, if you don't have your Bibles out, if you have them on your lap and you're just listening, I need you to open your Bibles, because I don't want you to trust what I say. I want you to trust what it says, okay? So everyone get your Bibles out if you haven't already. Luke 16, verse 1, all right? Jesus, what's the very next word for some of you? Told. What's another one? Huh? Said. Okay, Jesus said. Who said also? Very good. Jesus also said to the disciples. That's our missing word that we're looking for. So if you've got an NIV and you're reading along, you might want to write that in there because it's very critical. Jesus also told his disciples. And the reason that's in there is because it's connected. It's connected to the previous storyline. In Luke chapter 15, we hear this prodigal story. We hear this prodigal son story. It's the parable of the three losts, right? We have the lost sheep, we have the lost coin, and we have the lost son. Now, what's interesting about the losts is in Luke chapter 15, verse 1, it says that there was a time when Jesus had both Pharisees and sinners in the room. There were both religious people and people who didn't belong. There's probably some of that here today. There's probably people who you just don't feel like you belong here. You're in the right spot, because I don't feel like I belong here either. There are some of you who, man, this is your church, and you were raised here, and you're all in on Jesus. Guess what? I'm there too. There are moments in my life where I'm a Pharisee, and I'm also a sinner. And Jesus is talking to that mixed group. Now, in the first century setting that this storyline is in, there was a greater chasm than there is today. There was a greater divide between those who were religious, the elite in religion, and those who were common. And that was one of the main issues that the Pharisees would end up having with Jesus, is because he hung out with people that you don't hang out with. He hung out with sinners. He hung out with tax collectors. And it was like a setting like that. And Jesus tells these stories. If you're not familiar with 15, you'll have to go back and read it. But Luke tells us in chapter 16, at that moment, after he gets through talking about the lost son, you know what Jesus does? He looks at his disciples. So it's not just that there's sinners and tax collectors and Pharisees. There's almost three groups. There's sinners, tax collectors, Pharisees, and then his group of boys, the guys that have been following him. And this is the moment where he turns and he looks at them and he addresses them. And this is what he says. He says, hey guys, there was a rich man. It was a rich man. Now, immediately, everyone in his audience knew what Jesus was doing. He was telling one of his stories. He was telling a parable. And as we look at parables, we know, because we study this stuff, and because you guys are intelligent people, that in every parable, there's somebody that represents God the Father, or God, the triune God, and there's somebody that represents us. There's sometimes somebody that represents the enemy. And so he starts in with this parable, and his audience, both the disciples, the tax collectors, sinners, and the Pharisees, they know instantly what Jesus is doing. He says, there once was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. Now, immediately, there's kind of like this unbelievable component to this story. Here's why it's so unbelievable. In their world, nobody had enough acquired wealth that you would actually give that responsibility of managing that wealth to somebody else. So this is kind of like this far out story. But Jesus says, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and he said, what is this that I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be a management any longer. So this money manager is accused, much like the enemy accuses us of wrongdoing. He's accused of mismanagement of this rich man's resources. And the rich man wants to know what's going on. He says, I need you to give me an account as to what's happening. So you can't work with me any longer because there's this big question mark on your ability to perform. See, this manager found himself suddenly in crisis form. He found himself where now all of a sudden everything that he had worked so hard to preserve his position with was in jeopardy. Instead of thinking about later, he's concentrated on thinking about now. He's thinking about the immediate, and that's what this guy's guilty of. And that as the owner calls him in, suddenly this manager starts to scramble, and he starts to wonder, what should I do? And if you look at verse 3, it says, the manager said to himself, this is an internal conversation, what shall I do now? And this is the most critical agent of this entire storyline. It's the time. It's urgency. See, with this little bit of time and with this little bit of opportunity that I have left to be this guy's money manager, the manager says, what should I do at this point? I don't know if you've ever lost your job. I don't know if you've ever suddenly had the boss come in and say you're fired. I don't know if you've ever had that moment where now what happens, but that's where this guy is. And sometimes in those moments, your entire identity, your entire future, your entire purpose in life gets jeopardized. It gets compromised, doesn't it? Because now you wonder not what will you do, it's really who am I? That becomes the question. And he has this conversation with himself. He says, my master is going to take away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig. He knows that I can't get a shovel and go to work with Howery Construction. I'm not strong enough to do that. I've heard that Howery does the whole, 20-pound sledge to the nose test. I'm not strong enough to do that, so I can't do that. And I'm too proud to actually beg. I'm not going to be the guy on the corner with a can asking for handouts. That's just not what I'm going to do. So I know what I'll do. I'm going to call in all of my master's debtors because now I'm trying to figure out what's next. And he said that he called all of the debtors in, and with the first debtor he said to him, can you tell me what your bill is for my master? And the first debtor said, yeah, I owe your master like 900 bushels, 900 bushels of oil, or I'm sorry, 900 gallons of oil. Now, some of you're reading different multiple versions, and it might say 9, it might say 8, it might say measurements of oil. We really don't know specifically how much oil this guy owed his master. We just know that there was a big volume, perhaps 900 gallons, perhaps 800 gallons of oil that he owed. And this guy said, quickly, let's take your bill and let's cut it in half. So he strikes it 50%. You know what happens in that interaction? The manager, after he said, hey, take 50% off, the guy sitting across the desk goes, wow, yeah, I think I can do 50%. I'll give you 450 gallons, you bet. Where do you want cash or check? I'll do that right now. Well, either way's fine. Man, that's really nice. If I can ever repay it back, let me know sometime. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. The next one comes in, and this guy owes about 1,000 bushels of wheat. And as he's sitting across the desk, the money manager says, you know what? You've been a loyal employee. You've been a loyal debtor. How about we take it and cut it in 20%? Well, could you do 800 bushels instead of 1,000? Oh, yeah, all day. And he writes out his check, and after he hands the check over to the money manager, he goes, hey, I just got to tell you, if there's ever anything I can do to repay this, you let me know. The money manager the whole time's going, all right, I appreciate that. I'll keep that in mind. Let me take your business card. Now, some of you're interacting with this story the same way that the first century audience would have interacted with this story. Let me ask you a question. If you haven't read on ahead, then this is going to be perfect for you. If you have, and if you know the end of the story, just pretend that you don't. How many of you identify with the people that owe the money, and you're like, man, this is an amazing gift that this money manager gave? How many of you think it was fantastic that this guy would forgive debt? Go ahead and raise your hand. It's okay. This isn't a bait and switch. How many of you are like, that crook, no wonder he's getting fired? Okay? It's kind of mixed, right? And you know what was going on when Jesus was telling this story? It was about 50-50. There were some in the audience that went, man, that's amazing. There were some in the audience that went, that dirty dog. man, he's going to get it when that manager finds out what happened. So that's why Jesus was so good at telling stories. It's because he knew just how to scramble those categories just enough that we would ask, what's Jesus up to? What's he trying to say? What's he trying to get at? See, Jesus says, if you'll follow me, in verse 8, the master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than the people of light. See, what this whole story is about is this one concept. There should be an urgency with our resources. There should be an urgency with the resources that are at our disposal. Time, currency, there should be an urgency with currency. We should make the most of our limited and disposable resources as we can. And then he leans in and he gives a commandment. And he says, I tell you, now this is in verse 9, I tell you, and what he's telling those people, he's telling his followers, remember this is for the disciples, I tell you, this is the command, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it's gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. See, the only way we can actually take this application or this commandment seriously is with the resurrection. That's the only reason. If Jesus did predict his death and resurrection, and he pulled it off 3 days later, all of a sudden everything that he makes sense, or everything that he says, makes complete sense to us. But if he didn't do the resurrection, everything that Jesus said before the resurrection, we could just throw in the garbage can. It's the resurrection that brings credence to this application or commandment. So when Jesus says, I tell you the truth, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it's gone, and there will be a day when it's gone, and actually, you know what? There's a day when you're gone too. When that happens, you will be welcomed into eternal dwelling. See, what Jesus is saying here is your money, your possessions, it's a means to an end, not the end itself. It serves a purpose. It's a means to an end. So the question, are we using our right now resources today to make an impact forever, to make a difference forever? Or are we just using our right now resources for right now's purposes? And that's what Jesus is asking in this parable. That's kind of what's implied in this parable. And the follow-up here is, how much of our means that we've been given, whether it be time or resources, should be used and leveraged for the kingdom's purposes? 10% or 100%? That's what's on the table. And Jesus is leaning in and telling these disciples, money, your resources, it's not the end all. It's not the end, it's a means to an end. And we would do well to keep that in mind. And for all of us who understand that we're interfacing with our finances through a stewardship mentality, through a management mentality rather than an ownership mentality, all of this makes complete sense, because you know where joy is found? Joy is found when we're giving our resources and giving our time and giving our gifts and giving our talents away, not keeping them and hoarding them for ourselves to build our own kingdom. Jesus goes on. He starts this in verse 10. He says, whoever can be trusted. Now, before we can kind of go into that, we have to mine some other gold. You see, there's a practical element to this. We have to determine what percentage of our income we're going to live off of. Now, that might sound weird, but think about it for a second. You have already decided what percentage of your income you're living off of today. Maybe you didn't directly decide, but you have determined what percentage of your income you've decided to live off of. Some of you are living off of 100% of your income. Some of you are living off of 90% of your income. Some of you are living off of, get this, 110% of your income. You all have decided what percentage of your income you're going to live off of. How much thought did you give to that percentage, though? So from a practical standpoint, if we're called to use money as a means to an end and not find money as an end itself, one of the things that we can ask is, what percentage of our income do we want to live off of? We want to err on the side of generosity. And see, the result will be you'll find stories instead of stuff in your life. You see, when we decide to live off of 100 or 110% of our income, you know what we gather around us? We gather things, we gather possessions, we gather stuff. But Jesus wants you to gather stories. He wants you to tell stories. One of my favorite things to do is to tell about how God has provided for us in our life. One of the things that Mandy and I decided to do early on when we first moved to Iowa was try to buy a 5-speed vehicle for our kids so that they would learn how to shift a manual. And we were trying to find the perfect car when we first moved, and it just wasn't there. And so finally, after some time, I just said, God, we need to give this over to you. I'm gonna push pause, and maybe you're not giving me a vehicle that I think is gonna serve the purpose that I want it to. So we just stopped praying about it. About 6 months later, after we moved here, I said to Mandy, I think that we're supposed to look again. And she said, okay, that's fine, but let's narrow the parameters. Let's not widen the parameters. Let's say, God, if you want us to have a vehicle, then we would like to see it be a 4-door coupe. We'd like to have it be a 5-speed manual shift. And you know what? Instead of us looking for it, why don't you bring it to us? So we prayed that prayer and literally jumped on Craigslist, and we started looking for a manual shifter. And you know what? We found that little Nissan that Joe drives. We had a certain number that we wanted to give for it, and it was about $2,500. And the prayer that we had just prayed that God would bring it to us, you know where the transaction location was? Rising Sun's parking lot. It's just an amazing story. When we finally give all of our possessions over to God, God's able to tell stories through those possessions that point people to Him. One of the things I love to do when I come into this building is to tell stories about the work that's happening Monday through Saturday. In the last month, we've had close to 4 or 5 baptisms that have happened Monday through Saturday, not on Sunday. And it's because people are eager to hear about Jesus. People are changing. People have changed their lives as they've encountered Jesus. And what we tell is stuff, we tell stories. We don't broadcast our stuff. So we can only do that if we understand that money is a tool. So do we want stuff or do we want stories at the end of our time together? In verse 10, whoever can be trusted with very little. Jesus tells this application, this direct application for all of us. And he says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. Whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you've not been trusted or trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you to hold true riches? If you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? And immediately, some of this language that Jesus is talking about, the audience would have said, wait a second, there's something other than worldly wealth? Aha, you're paying attention. There is something better and more than worldly wealth. You see, our finances, our money, not only is it a means to an end, not just an end, not only is it a tool, but it's also a test for us. It's something that He uses to grade us against what we see finances and kingdom all being together. So your money is not only a tool, but it's also a test. Just like the story with the money manager, we have a little bit of time, and maybe we have a little bit of money, and we are being tested to determine whose kingdom are we going to invest in. Are we going to invest in our own kingdom? Are we going to invest in the worldly kingdom? Or are we going to invest in a heavenly kingdom? Who are we managing this resource for? You see what Jesus said? Verse 12, and if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property. I said at the beginning of the series, some of you are going to interface with financial conversations through ownership. You think that what you've been given is yours. Some of you are going to interface with it through stewardship. You know that you've not been given anything. You've just been given stewardship of things, and so it's your requirement, it's your responsibility to manage that well. And so when Jesus drops this little gem, someone else's property, He's indicating that this is about stewardship, not ownership for us. So whatever resources you've been given, whether it's time or whether it's money, whether it's land, equipment, stuff, it's all a test. It's all a test on what are you going to do with it? How are you going to manage it? You see, the deeper question is, who am I managing the money for? So if what I've been given isn't mine, and I'm actually a steward of this resource, Well, then who's it belong to? And that's the beauty of this entire story. Because it's not yours. One of the things that Mandy and I used to do with our kids when they were younger, and young parents, you're going to love this. You know what your kids will say when they're fighting over a toy? They will say, hey, he took my toy, or he took my salad, or he took whatever it is. He took my. One of the things that Mandy and I stumbled into early in our parenting was to ask the question, whose is it anyway? Because if we create stewardship as our environment as a home, if we create stewardship as our attitude as a church, now all of a sudden the things that are around us aren't ours for our benefit, they're his, for his benefit. And if you can teach your children, these are not your toys, this is his toy, and he's let you borrow it so that you might use it for him, all of a sudden it's a game changer for your parenting strategies. You don't have to worry about whose it is and is it mine or is it hers. It's all his. You see, if we're just stardust, if we're just accidents, if we're just a ball of mass that the world says that we are, everything that I've just said and everything that Jesus just said, it doesn't make any sense. If we're just accidents, then of course you are owners of what you've been given. But if God really did say at the beginning, let there be light, if God really did create the heavens and the earth, if God really did put into a strategy or execute a strategy that says, I'm going to redeem these people, they are going to be my people, and I'm going to be their God, if all of that is true, then everything that Jesus said makes complete sense. It's that money is a means, not an end. Money is a tool to be used and leveraged for the kingdom, and it's also a test for how he's going to, or how you interact with that money. See, money would tell us, I can't add meaning to your life, or I can add meaning to your life, but I'm not the meaning of your life. That's what money would tell us, and that's what Jesus is telling us here. I want you to look down at verse 14. This is how Jesus ends it. It says, the Pharisees, who loved money. This is what Luke tells us. He gives us a little parenthetical. The Pharisees, who loved money, heard all of this and were sneering at Jesus. The Pharisees, who loved money, heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. You know, I think that the biggest application in this entire thing is this. Your heart will follow your money, or your money will follow your heart. That's what this whole thing's all about. You can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. Your money will follow your heart, or your heart will follow your money. So, you know that last verse that I just read with the Pharisees? The Pharisees who loved money heard all of this and were sneering at Jesus. You know what their names are? I don't either. And that's the beauty of it. Because if you want to last, if you want your money to be a means to an end that's bigger and broader than yourself, and not an end by itself, then how you interact with that money, how you engage with that money, how you use that money as a tool, and how you are tested with that money will determine the outcome of your life. And your life can go beyond yourself, and your money will be here a lot longer than you will. And that's one of the biggest applications for us is you're not an owner, because it's going to be here long after you are. And that's where we're going to pick up next week. God, thanks so much for this day. Thanks for your teaching. Thanks for preserving your word through history. Thanks for using authors like Luke and Mark and Matthew, John, Paul, to hold the principles, the applications, and the lessons that we need to have held in our life and in front of us for eternity so that we might be a people who belong to you. Lord, I pray that you would continue to make us better tomorrow than we are today. In Christ's name, amen.